It's more interesting to see where it takes you than having it all figured out ahead of time.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Beyond the Palette. I'm Whitney Rosenson, owner and president of Art Dimensions, a fine contemporary art leasing and sales business here in Los Angeles. I am a huge lover of contemporary art, and I grew up around it as my mother and stepfather were avid collectors. I have a BA in History of Art from the University of Michigan, and I've been running Art Dimensions for 20 years. Each week on the podcast, I'll be chatting with a different artist on my roster and diving deep into their creative process. And I may just throw in a few other art world folks like collectors, set decorators, and gallerists. If you're curious about contemporary art, how it gets produced, and by whom, you're listening to the right podcast. So today I am extremely excited because I'm going to be chatting with an outstanding painter and sculptor, Trine Churchill. Trine is from Denmark, but now lives in Los Angeles, and we have been working together for about 10 years, maybe 10 years. So hi, Trine. Welcome to Beyond the Palette.
Hi, Whitney. Thanks for inviting me.
It's so good to see you and have you, and thank you for making the time.
Of course. My pleasure.
All right, let's dive in. When did you move to the United States, and why did you move to the States?
It's almost a little bit of a trick question because I've moved quite a few times to the States. The very first time I moved to the States was in 85 or 86, I believe, as an exchange student. At the time, I was in high school in Denmark. My parents thought it would be a good thing to try to be a little bit on my own, and they sent me off, and I ended up staying a year with a host family down in the San Diego area in Encinitas.
And how was Encinitas?
It was very interesting. It was definitely an eye-opener to such a different culture coming from Denmark. And also just being away from your parents. I think I was 15 at the time, 15 or 16. So it was my first time, even like flying on my own and that kind of stuff.
So very independent.
Yeah, well, it was a learning curve, let me put it that way. After that year, actually what happened, my parents came to visit at the end of the year. They had always been sort of playing with the idea of moving to the States. My dad was a cartoonist, and some of his sort of heroes were American cartoonists. And so they'd always, as we were growing up, I think that had played in that background, the idea of moving here. So when they came to visit me in Encinitas, they completely fell in love with Southern California. A few years later, by then I had returned back to Denmark and I had finished my school there. So in 89, the whole family immigrated to the States. My oldest sister, I think she stayed behind for another year, but then eventually also joined us. So that was my second round of coming to America, was then in 89 when I moved with them. At that point, I was now 18 or 19. So the idea for me to go to art school, at that time it was called Otis Parsons, the Otis College of Art and Design. I started in 1990. Completed that, but within those 4 years, I actually had a run off to Paris, where I went to it was again an exchange program between Otis and the school École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, where one of their students came to Otis, and I was then transferred over to the school in Paris for a semester.
So one semester in Paris. Wonderful.
Yeah. I returned to Los Angeles, completed my Bachelor of Fine Art there. At that point, I actually decided to go back to Denmark. Did that for a couple of years, and then eventually came back in 97 and have stayed ever since.
I guess it took you 3 different times to settle here.
Yeah.
Now, I know growing up in Denmark, I read that your home was surrounded by woods and rivers, and
yeah.
How did that affect your love, or how did that influence your painting or your love for painting? And did you paint as a child?
I drew a lot as a child. Given that my dad was a cartoonist and he worked from home, I always, had that inspiration right there. So it felt very natural to draw, and I would use watercolors, stuff like that. Actually, if you'd asked me then that I would become a painter, I would never have thought that. That had very much to do with going to an art school and going through the program there and making that realization along the way. At the time, as a kid, kind of ironic, you sort of don't always appreciate what you have. So at that time, I sort of dismissed nature, and all I wanted to do I would just want to be a city kid, and there was much more interesting. So it actually is not until later in life that I have looked back on what an incredible
Environment.
thing that was. Yeah, environment, to be like literally right out my door. Our house, which was actually kind of a cookie cutter complex. There was like an enclave of the same looking houses, but the house that we lived in was right on the edge of that. Literally outside my door was a big field and the river.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and just half an hour from Copenhagen.
I haven't been there ever yet. I mean, I haven't been to Copenhagen yet, but I'm looking forward to going. Did you watch your dad as he created his cartoons? And
Oh yeah, for sure. Not only watch him, he put us to work.
oh, okay. How so?
We would tease him later on because we were like, "Hey, that's child labor, unpaid child labor." He did these animations that were still, so it was made in a very old-fashioned way where he would draw on cardboard and color them, and then it was up to us kids to cut them out, and so they would later on be filmed and placed, and made animation out of that.
Wow. So interesting. And what ages did you mostly work with your dad?
I think probably we had to be old enough not to spill the ink, or like I think he wouldn't trust us at that young of an age. But I think I would probably have been about 10, 11.
Okay. And your teenage years were spent a little bit doing that?
Yeah, a little bit. Kind of depended what he was working on, if he needed the help or not. But yeah,
So
that's
interesting.
interesting.
Well, your dad sounds like an amazing man. I was watching this short film that you made at Castelli Art Space, and you talk about a lot of your paintings that are hanging in the space. There's one particular painting that you claim focuses on finding personal empowerment. So my question is, what does finding this personal empowerment, what does that mean to you?
Was it the painting with the little girl and there's like a van in the background?
Yeah, and she's sitting in the foreground.
That particular painting is called Song of the Open Road. It was based on a photograph I found that, funny enough, in the beginning, I thought it was a photograph of myself. It turned out later on, I realized it was a photograph of my sister, my older sister. But she is dressed up in a Halloween costume, or the equivalent of that in Denmark. It takes place in February, where the kids dress up and have their Halloween. So she's sitting on a curb. She's looking down. She's like sad or frustrated. The foreground is in somewhat monochromatic colors, almost like kind of black and white-ish. And then you see this van in the background. The sky itself is filled up with very kind of flower power, very colorful flowers. So it's sort of suggesting that she has a way out. And for her, it's a moment of being fed up with the situation and wanting a way out. It's actually a moment of her finding her own voice.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to say I'm going to post an image of this painting on the website so people can see it.
I think for me personally, it meant finding independence. I grew up in a very loving and very protected environment. I would consider I had a great childhood, having a dad who's a cartoonist. Both of my parents always encouraged me to make art. That was never sort of like, are you crazy? You're going to attempt to be an artist. because how could they? They were, or my dad was, right? How could they tell me not to? But the flip side of it was there wasn't much to revolve against. My dad and my mom were very caring and taking great care of us. So it was hard to find, like I say, something to revolve against and find your own independency and how to do stuff on your own. So that has been sort of an ongoing project, finding your independence and finding strength in being on your own. I call it ongoing. Of course, I've found it, but it's always a muscle that needs to get strengthened.
And would you say that's a theme consistent in your work in general?
No, it's not. It's not an ongoing theme, but it pops up now and then.
Well, that painting that we're discussing, that would be a part of the memory paintings.
Yes.
I know you've got the memory paintings, the dream landscapes, and the animal fantasy worlds.
Right.
What are the differences amongst these categories? Yeah.
Well, chronologically, the animal fantasy worlds are older stuff. They're probably by now about 10 years. At the time, they arrived because before those groups of paintings, I was painting figurative stuff, a little grotesque, a little cartoonish, probably inspired by my background. I didn't quite, with that body of work, I felt like I was missing a little bit of a link between what I was making and how they were perceived or received. That people got a little stuck on the figure itself and missing a lot of what was going on in the background. At least that was my understanding at the time. So I kind of just made a decision back then to avoid painting the figure, like the human figure. Just, I'm going to skip it. I'm just going to do something else. That something else became animals. So I did many years of just painting animals, but painting them in a very sort of imaginative environment. And the process was first to create the background that was made kind of by pouring paint onto a canvas, letting it sit and see where it went. And then it was once I had that background, it was a little bit like reading the clouds or allowing that imagery to speak to me and think of something I wanted to put on there, but within the animal world. So then it would be like, I would look at it and would think, peacock. And then I would go look for images that would be of peacocks. And then I would place the peacock. And then now I had background on peacock. And then I would look at it again and something else would jump into my mind. And so it became this sort of collaboration between the imagery that was already placed and what came to mind, and then I would layer it and then layer it, and then at a certain point feel like, oh, that's it, I'm done. Then I did that for a number of years. I just felt like I was kind of done with that. It's like I felt like, okay, now I've done this. I don't know if I'm growing more with it. I need to do something else. I want to do something else. And so that became a focal point more on nature. And I think perhaps that has to do with having made a move, like a physical move from living in Santa Monica, that area, to having met my now husband, Spencer, who lived in Los Feliz. So at the time I moved in with him in Los Feliz. And what we have here in our neighborhood is very close to us is Griffith Park. And just in general, there's a lot of great hikes and that you can walk in the street and be fairly close to nature, even though you are also in the city. And then on top of that, we have a great backyard that Spencer's making. Like, it's all these succulent plants that has a lot of whimsy and a lot of fantasy. So it was kind of a natural next step was to get into that world.
The dream landscapes.
Yeah. At the same time, started doing a journal, like a visual journal, where I would draw kind of just from my walk. Maybe I would take a photograph on a walk and I would go back home and start making a journal entry from that imagery. Those two kind of went hand in hand and became some of the journal drawings became an entry into a painting.
You start with a photograph.
Yeah, now I do. I kind of changed that approach. Went back in the days with the animals, where it was like, think of something, go find it by Googling. I now go the other way around, where I have an image first that is something more from my life, like either it's a photograph from my family album or it's a photograph that I've taken myself. Now and then I will incorporate, maybe like if I see in a newspaper article that has a great photo, maybe I'll use some of that. But for the most part, it's something that I have experienced or made.
It's amazing how your mind works. When you're painting, I don't want to say there's no plan, but it sounds like it's a very spontaneous, organic development, which I find really interesting. The fact that you can take a realistic photo and turn it into something a little bit more fantastical or fanciful is really incredible to me.
That's the idea, to allow that photo to just be the starting point and see where it takes you. And I try to deliberately not have a lot of planned ahead. I probably have a little bit more planned in my head than I realize, because as you're beginning the process of starting a new painting is already sort of in the back of your mind. I try not to have it all planned out ahead, because first of all, it's more interesting to me to paint it. It's more interesting to see where it takes you than having it all figured out ahead of time.
So how long does it take? I know one painting you were working on, I think it was a painting of your mother's book club or your mother's.
Oh, right.
Now that I know took months.
I think it took over a year, but it wasn't like I was painting on it for a year, but it was a painting that was based on a photograph of my mom's. It was actually a birthday party. It turns out to be a birthday party. So some of the women I recognized from when I was a kid. It was taken at around the time when I would have been like 5 years old or something. And there was a few of the women I recognized as aunt so-and-so, or like the girlfriend. But a lot of the women I did not recognize. So the painting itself has multiple portraits in there. I think it's 10 women or so in the picture. It just took a long time, because as I was painting each one of them, it was kind of fun. I got to know them a little bit. The ones that I didn't recognize was kind of cool.
So beautiful. How big is that? How large is that painting?
It's not super big. It's like a 30 by 40.
I love that painting. And what is the title?
In the Intoxicating Company of Sisters.
That will be on my website as well for people to see. That's a fantastic piece. Which leads to my next question or area of discussion with you. That piece, I think, has some brushstrokes, like abstract brushstrokes in the foreground. You sort of combine the realism with the abstraction. Why do you do that?
It's something that I enjoy visually to look at in other artists' paintings. I enjoy seeing that combination of something that's handled really abstractly and something that's recognizable and just thoroughly painted to realism. So it's a nice contrast, I think, within a painting, to have something very loose, kind of unidentified, to something that's extremely identified, or something in the middle of those two spectrum, of that spectrum.
Mm-hmm. So the other painting, let's say you're working on a smaller painting, how long will it normally take you to finish something? I mean, in the Intoxicating Company of Sisters is a different story, but
right now I'm working on some portraits that typically take about 4 or 5 days to complete. And that's a 16 by 16 format.
It's amazing that you can complete something so detailed and imaginative in that length of time. Has COVID affected your process at all?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, because that is that project I'm working on wouldn't have happened without COVID, because what it was in the beginning, about 1 year ago, that here in Los Angeles, we were sent home to shelter at home. And around that time, I thought, what would be meaningful that I do right now? Sure, I could carry on and do what I was doing before, but it felt like a moment in time where something had to to change a little bit. And so I came up with the idea of offering portraits by asking people to submit a picture of their life here now, a picture of who they were at home with and what their lives look like right here and now. And then in exchange, I would give them a free print of that painting that were to be painted. And then I also offer them to buy it if they want to, but there's no pressure in doing that. It was just a way of me to connect with strangers, if it was strangers who were submitting. And obviously, I also got a few friends who submitted. But in the end, I got about 30 some photos sent, and I'm getting close to being done. I have probably another 7 or so to go.
And that's just amazing. And then people buy the prints.
They gifted the print.
Oh, they're gifted the print.
Yeah. So I paint an original, and then I have it photographed, and then I send them a small, like 10 by 10 print as a thank you for participating.
And for sharing. That's lovely.
Yeah.
That's really lovely. Is there anything else you think our listeners would like to know about you?
Just that I love to stay in touch with people. And I do send out newsletters that I know people are like, oh, newsletters, but they are my journal drawings, and they do give a great insight to the process, how I work, and the thoughts I have behind the pieces I do. I have this method when I do a painting because I don't actually always myself know exactly what the painting is about once I'm complete with it. So I have this process where I step back and I start describing it very methodically, like up in the left corner, that's the brush stroke and the drips. And so I start out by describing, and that leads me into get a better understanding of what is actually taking place and happening in the painting. Some of those thoughts is what I'm sharing with those emails, and it's been a great dialogue to have with people. If you're into that kind of stuff, I would say join it.
Yes. I know I receive your newsletters, and I love reading them. You send them out monthly or?
Well, monthly, every 2 weeks when I'm good at it. Right now, it's been a few months, I think, since I did last one. But I aim for every 2 weeks.
Okay. And what is your website?
It is my name, TrineChurchill.com. And Trine is spelled with an E.
Trine. Fantastic. Thank you
Yes.
so much, Trine, for talking with me today. It's been so great and informative, so informative.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
Thank you so much, Trine. And thank you, artists and listeners, for tuning in to Art Dimensions Beyond the Palette. Make sure to subscribe on your favorite platform, follow us on Good Pods, and tell a friend about the podcast. As always, you can check out the works of artists on this show by visiting artdimensionsonline.com. Happy creating!